this is the first time we're doing remote, like in Santa Barbara, right? So my mic is kind of hanging off the this. Like I haven't. This is the same desk, but I haven't prepared the space really.
Okay, we'll make it work somehow.
No, we will.
Welcome to episode 23 of the Mom and Eric podcast. Um, and I should say in advance, I'll talk about the theme of what we're talking about this episode, but I should say in advance that the vibes may be different this episode. Number one, we're doing it at night. This is our first night episode. Not that that matters in terms of lighting or anything like that, but it does matter in terms of my energy level. So, I am an early to bed, early to rise type of person, so definitely more mellow. And then the other thing I would just say about our vibes tonight is that but particularly me, I've just been through some shit lately. And so coming off of a pretty stressful period of lots of personal stuff going on, in particular, the health of a dear family member. So, yeah. But we are lucky that we get to knock this one out of the park, right, Eric?
I think it's nice that you want to preface what our vibes might be for the episode, but you don't always have to do that. I mean,
That's true.
maybe it's gonna be more mellow. Maybe our, devoted fans will guess what our conditions are based on how we're talking, and that'll give them more insight into how we are as people, instead of us. It's show don't tell. You know what I mean?
I like to, in these circumstances, I actually like to tell because I'm not going to show.
All
I'm not going to show.
right.
But anyway, okay. So this episode, we are going to talk about, we're going to talk sort of more broadly about the theme of movies that feature robots as their central characters, or one of the central characters, and uh, all about the themes that sort of surround this idea of robots becoming more like us, more human. And so, really, this episode is about the theme of, what is the appeal of this story? Why does it have such enduring appeal? Why does it show up in so many different permutations? But I will say that one of the prompts for this episode was the fact that you are working for a company that did the trailer for The Wild Robot.
Sure.
I really thought the trailer was beautiful. I mean, the movie looked beautiful from the trailer. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the movie. And then you went to see it when it came out, and I went to see it this past Friday. Lots of thoughts about that movie. Um, lots and lots of really good things about that movie. So that movie is a quintessential example of a robot, as a central character becoming more human. So that's one of them. I will say that the other ones that were kind of circulating around in my head, the other movies, were all animated choices. So there was Big Hero 6. There was the Iron Giant, which I watched when it first came out and loved so, so much. And then just recently watched on the plane back from the East Coast, because I knew we were going to do this episode. And then there's Wally, which is probably my least favorite. A beautifully done movie, but my least favorite out of that bunch, out of the
Oh,
list
okay.
that I just said.
Yeah. I mean,
So
well, actually, okay. Well, no, sorry. Go into it.
yeah, I would say that Wally
Sorry.
is one of those quintessential examples of what you say when you give a movie 4 stars or 5 stars for being exceptionally well done, but you didn't love it. Like you wouldn't hit that
Yeah.
heart button on Letterboxd.
You think that's better than Big Hero 6?
Wally
Yeah,
is
or do you
better.
think it's worse than Big Hero 6? Sorry.
I don't love it as much as I love Big Hero 6.
Oh, interesting.
So first of all, let's talk about this theme. Let's talk about this story of a robot becoming human. Why do we think it's so appealing? Do you have any thoughts
Well,
on that, Eric?
well, first of all, it's a great title for an episode. I've realized I definitely often neglect your titles for our, like you come up with these creative titles and I'm like, okay, nobody wants to know like the sort of embellishment. Like let's just like you know, you know, let's just stick to the what we're talking about. But this one, since we are talking more broadly about like a bunch of movies, it makes way more sense, and it's also a great title because that is ultimately what the stories are about. It's why like we have movies about fish and movies about like just people that are or things that are characters that are not human because we just project humanity onto everything basically because
Yeah.
of our, egos. But it's sort of like a how could you not do that because we as humans feel so deeply. Um, it's very fun, emotional, impactful to sort of apply essentially like giant metaphors, on top of these things.
Yes. That is
And
actually what, can we stay on that point for a little
of
bit?
course, yeah,
It's this idea of giant metaphors and projecting it onto things. I think that as human beings, we are complex and we have so many things going on with us, like so many emotions and feelings and there's so much it's that old cliche, we contain multitudes, and so and then I think that the reason why robots work so well as this sort of becoming human theme is because you can kind of break apart our complexity because of their evolution into becoming more human. So you
yeah,
can actually see them test out things one by one by one,
yeah,
and you can, and they also, because they're robots, there are very strict boundaries on how they can express their emotions and feelings, because they have sort of disembodied voices and they're obviously not as fluid as we are. But it's amazing because to me, the whole central theme of robots is showing us, it's helping us deconstruct who we are
yeah.
because we're seeing it in reverse. We're seeing reverse engineering of who we are as human beings. And that to me was really, really profoundly, profoundly, profoundly embodied in the Iron Giant,
Hmm.
and also in the Wild Robot. So those are the two movies that I think did that evolution thing, the evolutionary arc about a robot sort of becoming more than, the sum of its parts, so to speak, really developing a soul. Those two movies I think were the most successful at it. And the only reason why Big Hero 6 didn't get there is because the robot in that case was already imbued with the personality of his older brother. It was already sort of written into his programming. Do you want to say more on this theme about why robots are so appealing?
What I was thinking about while you were saying that was sort of the evolution of just movies in general and how we've looked at robots. Like obviously a lot of the movies it's like we just robots are characters and we just assume that they're, they have souls and they're like humans. But
Yeah.
other ones it's about like it's like their infancy and they grow to that, there's
Yes.
different variations with the wild robot specifically. What was really interesting was, I saw it a second time with and with a Q&A from the director,
Yeah.
and he said but when they were designing Roz's voice that he asked their sound designer what he thinks that like a robot would sound like in this world, and the sound designer said like it would just sound like us, like at a certain point, this technology becomes so advanced that it just sounds exactly like a person would, which is something that Lupita Nyong'o did, I think, really well, and also the animators conveyed really
Yes.
well. But
Yeah. She's getting
like,
credit in a lot of the reviews about her voice acting
yeah,
because people noticed a very subtle arc
yeah,
in how she became sort of more and more emotional. So she's getting a lot of sort of calling out for that.
yeah, and that's totally deserved.
Yes, I
But
agree.
that's after a long line of movies. Like in the Iron Giant, he's the most basic sense of a robot. Like it's like
Yes.
like
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
so monotone, stuff like that. So I think it's interesting because they put Roz in Wild Robot in the position of like in a maternal position as a mother versus like other robots that are sort of like children. Because at a certain point, like, you know, they're sort of like children, like they're
Yes.
developing a consciousness and a
Yes.
sense of self, and you're helping develop, you're either choosing to help develop that or hurt that,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
very interesting.
The one thing I'll just say about and this is especially true for the animation medium too. One of the things that I really love about all of the movies, actually, and also this extends to the droids in Star Wars,
Yeah,
is that I think that when you have a robot character or an android character, I think that it's like writing a sonnet. It's like that metaphor from A Wrinkle in Time where they said the sonnet is you're governed by very, very strict rules and very, very strict boundaries. When the robot begins to evolve and grow and show emotion, it has to be done in an incredibly economical, way, like a very efficient way. You have to convey so much meaning with a simple gesture, and so or a simple like movement of their
Yeah.
head,
Or
like a
sometimes they don't have a face or eyes or
right.
yeah, sometimes it's just like you rely on their movements. Their
Yes, you
yeah.
rely on the simplest of movements to capture so much emotion. And so I told you that I was a complete and total mess when I was watching The Iron Giant
Yeah.
on the way home on the
Yeah,
flight.
same.
And oh my God, I was like sobbing. And the thing that just kills me that will always stay with me from that movie, it's such a beautiful movie. It's so beautifully done. But the thing that will stay with me from that movie is at that final scene where he's understands the choice that he's making and he understands that it is a choice. So when he flips his eyes upwards, like you see, and it's like this very crude iron robot head,
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
most old-fashioned, but yet the way that his eyes turn upwards and look upwards and then they turn back down, there is so much emotion that is conveyed by that look.
And he
It's
somehow like
amazing.
smiles in the end too. It's like,
Yes.
how do they convey that?
I don't know.
Um, I think
Did you watch it
also
again? Did you rewatch it?
no, actually.
Oh.
I Carrie wanted to watch Devil Wears Prada for some reason. So I rewatched that instead. But it's fine because I would have been sobbing if we rewatched it. But I did rewatch it a couple of years ago. And I was astonished by just how perfect I thought it was.
Yes, it's a
Some
perfect movie in so many
it
ways.
Yeah, and something that's the same. Big Hero 6 does a really similar thing, with
Yes.
Baymax sacrificing himself in the end of the movie. Some a really interesting element to that though is like sometimes the consciousness or like the sense of self within a robot or a movie decides to like portray it as more of a mystery and not or something up to interpretation and not always confidently saying like they're a person, or
Yeah.
they're like a human. Like Wild Robot was very confidently very almost too, maybe too much of maybe too sentimental or too
Yeah,
in
yeah,
your
yeah, yeah. I
face, but
completely
like
agree.
I'm a
Completely agree.
robot. I'm Roz and I'm the robot and I'm a mother and
Yes.
I, but
Yeah.
Baymax was more like you don't know exactly how he got his chip in his hand
Right.
when he shot his hand off. And if he did, then that meant, it was just like the death chip that was in his, you know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
it means you're guessing, you're left, just thinking about it. And the excitement of that is what's really, really what makes those characters like shine in those
Yes.
movies.
Yes.
Sure.
So you just brought up, so let's talk about movie by movie,
Yeah.
and we don't have to spend equal amounts of time on each movie, but let's talk about The Wild Robot because you brought up a point that is probably one of my biggest frustrations, which is that I thought that the movie veered into obviousness and sentimentality on so many occasions, and
Yeah.
so I think that this example of like, I'm a robot, like I think that they just, I think that they were the opposite of subtle about that theme.
Yeah.
I also think that the whole idea of them all coming together, like it was bizarre, by the way. There was a juxtaposition of like the movie was so casual about the violence of nature, like, oh,
Yes.
we all
Yes.
eat each other. And then all of a sudden we're all in the little wooden hut and we're all like a Disney family and like we're all hanging out together. So that whole thing felt really odd. But I don't think that's fair because I actually want to start with what I really liked about that movie. And overall, I actually did like the Wild Robot quite a bit, not just because your company worked on the promotion for
Same here.
it.
Yeah.
But I thought the animation was stunning. There's a really good balance between wide angle shots and
Yeah.
close-up shots. So, and that was used to really powerful effect to really get to know the character in its in a physical sort of 3D type of way. So there were so many times, and I remember when she was like looking down at some part of herself, or she was touching that transmitter thing, or she was
Oh
opening a
yeah.
compartment. So there were so many close-ups of Roz, where and then it was juxtaposed with these stunning, stunning scenes, and so the scenes of the island were unbelievable. And
Yeah.
that was actually true from the opening shot, like when you saw the sort of otters looking at her in the water, washing over the
Hmm.
box and then looking at, and then you also noticed the grime that she was acquiring, like the moss and the dirt that she was acquiring over time. It was just unbelievably gorgeously rendered. So I think the artwork for that movie was unparalleled. And
Yeah.
everybody's really hoping that it's going to be a contender for best animated feature. And everybody says, "Oh, I hope that it's entering the Oscar race." Of course, it's only going to lose to Inside Out 2.
Oh, if it does, I think I'm gonna be really pissed actually.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think I haven't
Oh,
seen Inside Out 2, but from what I hear of it, it was so much more meh than the first one, you
yeah,
know?
but it is like the highest grossing animated movie of all time, which is crazy.
That is
Um,
crazy. So
yeah,
I really, really loved the overall look of the Wild Robot. And I really, really loved Lupita's acting in it. I thought her voice acting was incredible. Um, and I loved some of the sequences were incredible. And
yeah.
so the Learn to Fly sequence, the whole Learn to Fly sequence
That's my
was
favorite. Yeah.
incredible. And
Mm-hmm.
the way that the camera angle kept on changing,
Mm-hmm.
and the way that it's like she was speeding up that scene where she was holding out her arms, and
Yes.
running
Oh
down
my
that
God,
road.
that's my
Oh my
favorite scene.
God.
Yeah.
I was just undone by
Yeah.
that. I was so moved by that.
It's so funny, but the first time I technically watched this movie was when I basically showed up at the company and they said like we got a new feature like and we need a transcript, so you need to transcribe the movie. So that meant like I watched it, but I had to pause it after every single line. So you can't just let like moments like pass over your head. Now I'm literally laser focused on every single beat, basically. Um, Especially when it's carried by the dialogue. Um, and but it says a lot when, a moment like that still made me feel like I'd be watching it, like it'd be a nice like music moment, and
Yeah.
then I'd have to pause to write something down, but I'd be like, like as I'm writing, like that's how powerful that sequence was.
Yes. So powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was really, really awesome to see that evolution from doing that to seeing it in the theater. Now, it wasn't seeing it in the theater and it's how it's meant to be was not fully enough to like overcome my expectations of it. Um, Even though I do think at the end of the day it's amazing. Like again, it is beautifully animated, beautifully scored, all this stuff. Um, and especially after listening to Chris Sanders talk about it, it's like there was almost too much love put into this movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, the he's described how every scene was or every shot was hand painted. The animators
Wow.
paint like literally he says everything you see is like somebody took the time to paint, literally.
Oh my gosh,
The
that's
only thing,
amazing.
and there were very minimal, like pure CGI elements. The one that sticks out is that Roz is fully CGI in the beginning, and then as Roz becomes more wild in the forest, she becomes more hand painted.
Yeah.
So her whole form changes, which I think is such a beautiful detail to add to that. Um, so I can say like I can very confidently say that it's so pretty, so beautiful. So, like there's so much, but there is so much and it's compact into this story that
Yeah.
is while I think it's perfect for kids because kids were pretty loud in the beginning when we were watching in the movie, and then when the movie started, they shut right up and like they were silent the entire movie. Um,
Same in
and
my theater, yeah.
and that's saying something because it's digestible enough for this whole group of people. But like sometimes I thought it was too much. So I think there was a bit too much score. I think there was too much music. There was not. This is called The Wild Robot, and it's kind of about being in the wild. And I didn't feel like we were in the wild that much. It was
Yeah.
more about like they were really playing into the story a lot. And sometimes I wish they just sat in silence. Like there's the moment where Bright Bill is bullied and then confronts Roz about her not being his mom and her not telling him that his parents were killed and or his parents, his family was killed. Um, and throughout that whole argument scene, there's music in the background, and I really wish it wasn't there because their performances and the writing alone was enough to make me feel something, but they were just kind of hammering it home when I really didn't
Yeah.
think like that was needed.
They
So
were
there was
hammering,
kind of
yeah. They were hammering it home. That's the thing. They just went
Yeah.
too hard on some of the emotional beats landed beautifully, and then some of them
Hmm.
you were just like you felt like you were being hit over the head with them, you know?
Exactly.
Yes. And then
But
there were
like,
parts about the plot that just didn't make any sense. Like I don't get the need to have that whole sequence like that whole sequence where Bright Bill is leading them and they go and stop in the
huh,
same place where Roz is from. That felt like it went on way too long, you know? And I don't know if it was supposed to establish Bright Bill as the new leader when he was able to save them and run away, but it felt so pointless and meandering. And then it just felt like the movie kept on going and stuffing in all these. Then there was a storm. Then there was like there was all this stuff like
yeah,
that just kept on happening, and you were just kind of like, okay. And maybe there's just too much going on here. you
yeah.
know it
And
lacked a light touch.
you gotta let things speak for themselves sometimes, I feel like.
Yes,
And that was kind
just
of
like you wanted me to do in the beginning of this episode.
no, we can all learn something from this. But
Rather
the
than
like
signal the vibes, you wanted me to just let the vibes come through.
yeah. The line that's pretty evident when he says when he's leading them, anything I can do, you can do, or something. He's like,
Yeah,
you could do anything I can do, you know?
right.
So it's like, why, you say that you're leading them. I don't
I
know.
know. Like, why do you
Um,
need to say that? Right,
and
right.
I have a really, and this stuck with me since I transcribed the movie, but I really am annoyed with how they treated Longneck. Like, he shows up and he has the dopest lines. He's like, all of a sudden, like the greatest mentor of all time.
Right.
Like, and I love him so much too because this is such a random thing I noticed, but like when they're about to take off for the
Right.
migration,
Right.
um, he says this line like sometimes the heart speaks for itself or something. But in that shot, it like zooms in on Bright Bill, and in the corner you see Longneck is like animated, and he just like looks really solemn, and it reminded me exactly of Nigel the pelican from Nemo, like the way that they're able to convey like his just earnestness and like
Yeah.
and sincere feelings.
Yeah.
For them to take that and it just like
Kill him off.
no, so where is he?
Oh.
Well, I guess.
Okay, okay,
Well, you
let's
made
just
it
move
back,
on.
so you're fine.
You're fine.
That pissed me off, dude.
When you told me that Chris Sanders had directed The Wild Robot and he had done How to Train Your Dragon and also Lilo and Stitch, that made me really think about what his strengths are, which I think were very much on display in The Wild Robot, and also what his weaknesses are. So I think that his weaknesses might be that he can't always come up with a coherent plot and he gets overly sentimental. Because I don't actually remember anything about Lilo and Stitch. And I also
huh,
remember that the alien that Stitch is the alien, right? I
that
remember
he
that.
voices. Yeah.
Yes, I remember that Stitch was not very likable. Like he was kind of feral. Like he was sort
Yeah,
of like a
yeah,
feral little angry little cat. You know what I mean?
yeah,
He was not. He looked cuddly, but he was actually kind of, a little bit terrifying at first. And
yeah,
so, anyway, my point is that I think that Chris Sanders is really good, though. I think that How to Train Your Dragon is probably his closest to perfect movie when it comes
yeah.
to the first
I think it's
one.
perfect. I
Yeah.
actually rewatched it and I thought it was perfect.
Yeah,
But
when it comes to story, when it comes to music, when it comes to pacing, and then I think that the strength, his greatest strength that goes across all three movies, um, I think he might have made other ones that I don't know of, is that he creates incredibly memorable characters. Like you remember certain characters, like they're just Hiccup, is it Hiccup?
yeah,
No, Toothless, Toothless.
well, to
Uh,
both of them.
Right. But so Toothless, he's just drawn and conceived of so beautifully.
Yeah.
And the robot of Roz is drawn and conceived of so beautifully.
Hmm.
And Lilo, more than Stitch even, like Lilo is just drawn as this little girl, this little ferocious little girl, who's like fighting for, her existence, and is orphaned. I think she didn't have parents, is what
Oh,
I
the girl.
remember.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
Lilo,
Sorry.
yeah. So, and she had this bizarre like fetish for Elvis too, I remember. And
Oh
so
yeah.
yeah, so like I
Forgot about
think that
that.
I think that he's really good at creating these characters that just leap off the screen, that you root for these characters. They just and he gives them really funny quirks and he gives them really well-rounded characters. Where he situates them though in the movie, like how he situates them in all the elements of the movies that we talk about in this podcast, that's not that it feels a little clunky at times.
Yeah.
So there were times that I was utterly caught up when I was watching The Wild Robot, and there were times where I was like, okay, that was a little cheesy. And I was like, okay, that was a little, okay, that's a little obvious.
Yeah.
Okay, what are we doing in this third act? Oh, wait, there's another third act. Oh, wait, there's a fifth act and a sixth, you know what I mean? And it kept on going. And I honestly thought that that bit about the woodland creatures all gathering together was just ridiculous. I really thought that that was ridiculous. I think that it's weird that you show at the beginning of the film how they all eat each other and then they're all going to get along now for the sake of whatever.
Something that, oh, also, let's not forget that this is an adaptation of a book. So it's sort of
Mm.
like they were being faithful to that from what he said.
Oh, that's right.
And something that he mentioned when he was talking about that was like the core idea of the book was the idea of kindness being a survival skill, which is what they say in the movie. They didn't need to say
Yeah.
that directly, but fucking whatever. Um, and it's funny because like I felt exactly all the things you were feeling the first couple times I saw it, but somehow seeing it again and just hearing the lines again, like um somehow it was so simple that it just got me like the second time, which is and even though I knew it was coming, especially because I've heard it so many times, I've heard some of these lines from the trailer like so many times, and it's like almost to an infuriating extent. But it's somehow still so funny, and it's
Yeah.
still like so full of heart that some like it just moved me like the second time. So,
Yeah. I
like
think
I
he's enormously talented. I think Chris
yeah
Sanders is enormously talented. I don't think he always fully succeeds, but it's kind of how I feel about movies that take a big swing at something and they just don't always
yeah
land. Like as you know, I felt that way about Everything Everywhere all
yeah
at once. I felt like that movie was stuffed full of ideas,
yeah that makes sense.
stuffed full of ideas. And yet its central premise was really about the mother-daughter relationship.
Hmm.
And so you kind of they were going on so many ideas in the metaverse, then it got to the point where it just seemed repetitive, that they were just trying to express this mother-daughter conflict through a million parts of the multiverse. And so
Yeah.
I think that Chris Sanders aims big. I think he aims big with his movies. But I actually think that How to Train Your Dragon is probably his masterpiece. Not that he should stop making movies, and I really enjoyed watching The Wild Robot. And actually, apparently, it's become a thing. Like it's become a thing with the kids who are watching it.
Oh
They
yeah.
are they are attaching themselves to that character, to Roz. And I think that that's really wonderful because that actually goes back to the theme of this episode, which is why do we love these movies so much? And it's the movies, these kids are seeing in this robot a reflection of themselves. They are
Yeah.
seeing this like figure. It's both somebody who would take care of them, but it's also somebody who's learning the same way that they're learning. They're learning about
Yeah.
the world, they're learning what exists in the world. And I think that one of the best sequences in the movie is when she actually goes into learning mode, and
Yeah.
I think I love that sequence, where it just
Yeah.
shows her processing all that data, because in the beginning, that's how she's learning, is she's learning through the data, and she's in artificial intelligence mode, basically. But
Hmm.
then later on, when she's learning that she's learning about all the things that her programming cannot teach her, and I
Yeah.
love
Yeah.
that. I love that she's learning about what it means. This is the same theme that comes up in The Iron Giant, this theme that comes up, which is that Hogarth keeps on saying to the Iron Giant, you have a choice. You can be good. You can be good.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I know, I know. Dude, I can't even. In the trailer, I was excited because I thought it was going to be no dialogue. Obviously, that's never going to be the case. But when I learned that that was how the dialogue comes in, I was like so much more relieved
Yeah.
because like that makes more sense, and it does leave for more fun things. Also, like I learned that Chris Sanders was a writer on Mulan and Lion King, which is
Yeah.
like
Wow.
which I fucking those are
Yeah, that's
great.
it. Two of our favorite animated movies. Movies like this succeed when the characters belong perfectly in their context, in their surroundings. And so it's it's really powerful because Roz is dropped in the middle of the forest and she's not supposed to be in the forest, and
Yeah.
she's programmed to execute tasks, and the forest is so gorgeously rendered around her. So transitioning to that, rewatching The Iron Giant, I was just struck upon the rewatch about how incredibly perfectly it reflected that time that it was set in.
Oh
And
yeah.
so yeah, so
Cold War.
yes, exactly. So The Iron Giant was done by Brad Bird.
Mm.
And it's called a Brad Bird movie. And I looked up his other credentials because I was so fascinated. He's really known for The Incredibles, like
Yeah.
those, that's his like big that and I
Magnum
love The
opus.
Incredibles. Love The Incredibles.
Yeah.
Probably up there. I think that we ranked that pretty high when we did our tier ranking of Pixar movies. But he's also a senior creative director or advisor on all of our favorite Pixar movies, like on Finding
Yeah.
Nemo, like all of them. He's way up there.
Hmm.
But Iron Giant was done before he was a part of Pixar. It was like his first big animated feature. And it's far more simplistic in terms of animation style. It's beautifully done, but it's not as complex as Pixar. It's not as complex as Wild Robot, for example. Like the surfaces don't shine. You don't feel the metal surfaces
Yeah.
and like you're in Dean's scrapyard, for example, like the character of Dean. Who's played by Harry Connick Jr., the singer. And you're in Dean's scrapyard, and you don't see the metal surfaces like gleaming and
No, no.
reflecting in the
Because
same way
there's
that you
there's
would.
background and then there's animated characters and then
Correct.
that's kind of it. Yeah.
Yes, correct. So in so many ways, it's almost like when I went back to watch The Little Mermaid after so many years of seeing it, The Little Mermaid looked really, really cartoony. I know that sounds like an odd word for anime, but The Little Mermaid looks so crude compared with the later Disney animated pics. It looked like a Saturday morning cartoon in terms of its animation style. It didn't even look as painterly and as painted and as beautiful as the early Snow White or the early Bambi, which were actually like hand painted by Disney artists. So it had all those beautiful, like soft colors and like soft, gorgeous, like, what Wild Robot basically achieved with all those scenes being painted. So the Iron Giant looks crude, although the scenes in the forest are gorgeously done. And I think that that is where Brad Bird was first really learning about perspective. So what's amazing about the Iron Giant is that it keeps on pulling back to show you just
Oh, huge he is.
how huge he is. Yeah, and how huge he is in relation to um Hogarth. And that's done as a sight gag too. The funniest sight gag in
Yeah.
that movie is when Hogarth goes to the lake with Dean and he does a cannonball into the lake.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a great sequence, where he's basically like saying, "You gotta come in," and then the Iron Giant jumps in and basically displaces all the water in the lake. And you see this memorable shot of Dean looking at a tidal
He
wave.
just
He's like looking up.
okay.
Okay. So I think that the Iron Giant, even though it's crude and it's, kind of early in Brad Bird's career, I actually think it's one of those things where it's he hit it out of the park like for one of his first features, and
Yeah.
it's the story itself is so beautiful. It plays on the Cold War paranoia and fear so, so well. But in particular, it doesn't get sentimental. Hogarth is way too annoying for it to be sentimental. Like he's like a real smart alecky kid in the beginning, and then he's more softens more and more until you really get to you really see the bond forming between him and the Iron Giant. But the one thing that I'll just say is that I was just so moved by that whole thing about you have a choice. You have a choice about who you are. I think that they were not heavy-handed about that theme, and they were basically doing it with this very primitive or this robot who had no idea what it was supposed to be doing. Like it knew that it had this advanced weaponry, but had no idea where it came from or what it was supposed to do. So therefore, Hogarth, at that moment of this Iron Giant's amnesia, Hogarth was saying, "You have a choice. You have a choice to be the person." And I think that just is the most amazing. I love that movie so much. I have to go
Yeah.
back and look how I rated it
Hmm.
on letterboxd because I
I
actually
saw.
think
You gave it a 4.5.
Oh, I think it might be a five for me. I just
It's a
love
five
it
for
so.
me.
Yeah, I love it so, so much. And
Yeah.
so, and the score is beautifully done. Oh, and then the other thing that I think is incredible about Iron Giant is that Big Hero 6, and we're going to transition to talking about Big Hero 6, and we don't have to spend much time on it. But remember how I said that Wild Robot had too many things happening in its third act. Big Hero 6 had a big, splashy third act action set piece at the end, which I felt was really tonally different than the rest of the movie. Like that last action sequence where they're trying to defeat whatever it was. I forget what they were trying to defeat at the end of Big Hero 6. What were they trying to defeat?
The guy with the in the kabuki mask that had
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
his technology.
Yeah. I thought that that went on for too long, and that last sequence in Big Hero 6 is what people hate about Marvel movies. Like when they don't think a Marvel movie is very good and they don't care about the characters, they hate that sort of big CGI thing that happens
Yeah,
at the end.
because I they
And
don't. It's like a it's trying to be too big when it feels like it's
right.
not that big at
Right.
all.
So for me, Big Hero 6 has many good parts in how it sets up the story and how it sets up the relationship and then the tragedy of him losing his brother, and there's so many things that are great about Big Hero 6, particularly the design of Baymax.
Hmm.
Somebody's called Baymax. I love his design. He's just so, he leaps off the screen because he's so cuddly. But Iron Giant is the only one that gets that third act perfect. You know what I mean? Relationship, suspense, it's building. You wonder if he's going to be found out by the government. He's being misrepresented by that crazy agent, federal agent guy. And then at the end, basically, it is by the way, it's the end of the Avengers. Almost identical. So, like, when Tony goes up to take that
Yeah,
nuclear, it's the
hey, that's probably
exact,
that's inspiration. Yeah,
yes, it's the exact same thing. And also, it's almost the exact same shot, by the way, because Iron Giant is like flying, and as he goes up to meet the missile, his eyes close in almost the exact same way that Tony Stark's eyes
yeah,
close when
yeah.
he's like when he's
Yeah, they
falling
must have
back in
copied the Avengers, man. Like, what the hell?
No, I
Um,
think the Avengers copied the Iron Giant
yeah,
in
see,
terms of
that's so
time.
that's the joke. I
Yes,
was
yeah,
joking that
yeah.
the one
You were
came before the
joking.
other.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay, okay. Anyway, so those are my feelings about Iron Giant. Do you have anything? Do you want to add about the Iron Giant? What you
Oh,
love?
yeah,
I'm
maybe.
sorry, I was talking a lot.
So many thoughts you just threw at me.
I'm sorry, I loved
No,
it so
so
much. I
no,
love that.
I agree with everything you said. I think it's interesting that you say the animation is crude for
Oh
Iron Giant,
no.
which I agree. I mean, I know what you're saying when you say that, but like it's back when, they were just still doing 2D hand animated movies.
Right.
That one, I mean, Iron Giant's really interesting though, because the Iron Giant was CGI, and so that made him feel more alien in the movie, which I
Yes.
think was so fucking smart. Um, but it's funny. I said like one time when I was at work, I was like, Wild Robot is probably like the peak we've reached in terms of animation right now, and and I had some very negative reactions to that because everybody knows like hand animated animation is so beautiful because it was done so tediously to make motion that's like really beautiful. And I
Yeah.
absolutely agree. I was just talking on terms of like how technology has progressed and exactly what you were talking about, where like metal feels like metal and like
Yes.
grass, you could like feel the grass. It's like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um,
And
but
also, I noticed that in Brad Bird's subsequent movies, like The
mhm,
Incredibles is incredible for
yeah,
its surfaces. I noticed
yeah,
it all the time. Like when Dash is running across the water, or when you see like the surfaces of that metal, attacking thing,
hmm,
they're amazing how much they show.
yeah. And that technique of hand animated movies, I feel like would contribute to like the tightness of like a story and the
Yeah.
tightness of like a plot too. Um, the struggle of Big Hero 6 was that the plot was like mid.
Yes, that's
Like
exactly right.
it was not um it was just like they were going in a direction that just didn't feel right for the movie. Like it was like too obvious. Everybody says it was too obvious. The villain was too obvious.
Yes.
Um and I think it was because the one thing I was noticing was like, in more classic Disney movies, like you'll see like Little Mermaid and Aladdin, like you get the sort of B side, which is the villain side. Like you see the villain plotting their evil plan and it's mostly like a gag sometimes, but a lot of times it leads up to a really serious thing that they're doing. Like
Right.
you think it's all fun and games until they're actually doing something terrible, you know?
Right. Right.
And Big Hero 6 was missing that because they were spending so much time and care and love like setting up the relationship with Hero and with his brother and with Baymax that they couldn't spend as much time setting up any sort of like meaningful plot in the beginning.
That's
And
right.
it coalesced to being like a Marvel shit show basically.
Yes, I
Um
agree with you. Everything you said, spot on. You put it much better than I did.
no, not at all. But I mean exactly what you said. But yeah. Um but it's because Baymax was such a lovable like just so lovable. I found out when I was like, why isn't there a sequel to this? I looked at what was made after the movie came out, and there's just a show called um I think it's just called Baymax. And
Yes.
I didn't even need to watch any episodes, but I just see thumbnails and it's they're all the episodes are named after little kids. And they're just little kids that he like takes care of. And then in
Oh,
the I see in the thumbnail of the last episode, there's a little description and it says like Baymax needs help and all the kids come together to like oh my like that's the sweetest thing I've ever heard. And it's also keeping in line with his inception, which was that he wants to help people.
right.
Or Tadashi wanted Big Hero 6 to Big Hero 6 Baymax to help a lot of people. So
Right.
it but it that's not to say that it wasn't that the movie wasn't good. It just like it just could have been a plot more in service to that story.
Yeah. A Baymax is a type of character that Chris Sanders would, develop. Like it's just
Yeah.
and it's the way he's designed, the way he's conceived, and then the way he acts. I mean, the thing that will always stick with me is the what is it? The fa la 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 la. What does he do?
Ba
I
la
love
la la.
ba la 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 la.
Yeah, yeah. So
I love that.
going back on like the just the topic of like robots and them being human and stuff like um it's just a really good plot device that and a good workaround to make these characters emotional or have emotions and stuff that
Yeah.
they will say, well, to complete this task, which is in my coding, I have to do this.
Right.
I have to override my code or I have to like download this information, or do this thing like and it was again very straightly said in Wild Robot, like, you've been overwriting your code for
Yeah. Yeah.
months.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I had to complete my task. It doesn't have to be said in the other movies, obviously, but it's still a really just good device because like that's
Yes.
that's it for nerds who want to like theorize how this actually happened and how could this happen. It's pretty simple.
So let's finish off by talking about the movie that I like the least, which is Wall-E. And what's interesting to me, and what one of the things that sort of made me think about it in relation to the title of this episode, being human or becoming human, is the fact that Wall-E is the movie that has the least amount of humans in it. But you see Wall-E in relation to what is essentially a dystopian future. It's a future where we have wasted our planet, and it's so environmentally degraded. And not only that, but when he does come into contact with humans, they're obese and they can do nothing for themselves and they have like no initiative. They've just become like these sad little lumps of people. And then on top of the dystopian element and on top of the fact that human beings have become obese and useless, um, on top of that, there's terrifying AI involved, where the whatever I forget what it's called. I read it in the plot recap, but there's some like terrifying element that doesn't want them to go back to Earth and wants to abort the mission and wants to prevent Wally and actually like tries to destroy
Yeah, yeah.
Wally entirely. So I guess all three of those things. I think that Wally is an incredibly well done film, and it's done by Andrew Stanton also, who is one of the most, as far as Andrew Stanton is Finding Nemo, which is one of our favorite Pixar movies ever. And I think that Wall-E is an incredibly ambitious movie that doesn't quite work for me. Like I never want to rewatch it ever again. And I remember when we watched it the first time we saw it, you were pretty little, and we saw it with our friends, the Hobsons, and at one point I heard Ray say, "God, this is really depressing." This movie,
Yeah.
and it is like there's so many depressing parts to that movie, and I mean, it tries to end on this note of hope, that there's like one little plant that survived, and that means that like Earth is coming back, but it's not an easy movie to take because of how bleak the vision of the future is, I think. And no matter how cute you make a robot, no matter how much you anthropomorphize a robot and make it human and make it fall in love, it falls in love with that like adorable little other robot, Eve, I think her name is. Oh, I guess that's Adam and Eve. I guess that's the whole metaphor. Anyway, I never really got that until now. But anyway, um, no matter how much you imbue that robot with human emotions, like he's just trying to do his job, he's trying to save the world, he's trying to complete his mission, he falls in love, he wants Eve to notice him, all these things it is too much. It's too swamped for me. And so that whole idea, the whole central appeal about a robot evolving and mirroring ourselves and our own evolution and what we're capable of, that to me is flattened out by the bleak dystopian vision of our future. So that's my take on Wall-E. I don't know if you liked it more than I did.
Sorry, could you wait? Sorry, could you repeat that last bit?
Yes, no matter how cute they made Wall-E,
Yeah.
no matter how human, how adorable, and how much they imbued him with emotions. Like he's this dogged little robot. He's just trying to get his mission done. And then he falls in love with Eve. He's just trying to exist and survive. And because he's a robot, he's existing and doing his
Yeah, yeah.
And so no matter how much they do that, to me, it's still overwhelmed
Yeah, okay.
by the dystopian nature of the future and the fact that we are given a terrifying glimpse about what we could become,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
these obese individuals locked on a ship and not allowed to return to
Yeah.
Earth. That is terrifying. That's terrifying.
Yeah. I think
I
that's a
don't know if you
really
liked it more than I did.
well, okay, the basis of my relationship with the movie Wall-E is that when I watch it, I will sob, like
Really?
yeah. No, it's like it's
It
such a
makes you
be
sad?
yes. Dude, I
Wow.
mean it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. I remember I rewatched it and I cried a lot. And because, it's also just too that's another movie that so much love was poured into. We've talked a lot about Ben Burt, obviously, and he did that movie, he sound designed that movie, and that the emotion of that comes through regardless of like how I feel about the entire plot. Which in that regard, I think there's a point you're making that's pretty valid about how the dystopian future element and the all that stuff weighs a little too heavy, which I think it totally makes sense. And I think that manifests for me just within the human characters. Like I think it's a great idea and a good sort of plot element that the human characters are fat and obese and they're only on these giant ships and like they just watch TV all day. Like I think that's really interesting. But in the movie they had just like a really big role, like like come on, we as a society have to corral like and help Wally, and like the captain like has his moment of bravery. It's like I think because the dystopian future is so devastating and awful, like them having that big of a role is like it, it's like it's just a little much. So, but the core of Wally and Eve, like their whole story and wanting to have it, and honestly wanting to have a better future, not just for themselves as robots, but also like contributing to their environment and all that is still something that really resonates with me. And on the element of like the inclusion of the humans and stuff, like I almost feel like it does a better job than Wild Robot in that sense, because it's sort of in Wild Robot it kind of feels like an afterthought, like this like dystopian or utopian society, where
Right.
like they have these robot, like the geese show up in the farm area, and Bright Bill's like, don't worry, they're programmed not to hurt us. And then all of a sudden these giant fucking beef robots like come out with
Yes, yes,
lasers and
yeah,
start
come out.
shooting them.
Yes.
It's like, okay, where did that come from? We
Right.
have no insight into like the humans and why those are made. Whereas in Wall-E, it's like we know exactly why they're like that. Because they gave up, or they like just moved on and did something else.
I
So
know that's so depressing though.
yeah, and so I totally see why that's like too much. But I think the core of Wally for me, with my experience of it, is probably just like the first like 30 minutes to an hour, like where he's just in that alone on that planet, like, and he's got his little shed and he's decorated it and he's watching romance, like old 20s romance movies or something. And like and then he meets Eve, and then it's just like it's so delightful. So all the other stuff is like I think it is fun. It's like I think it's fun to watch a fucking fat captain like fight the AI. But like um that what I actually really care about
I
is
think
what
it's
was in
fun to
that.
watch the fat captain fight the AI.
Yeah. But what I actually care about is in that first hour. So
Yeah, you know what this reminds me of how we talked about Wally to me belongs in the same category as Up.
yeah.
Because it has sequences that will forever stay in my mind as incredibly beautiful. And like you're almost like there are times when you're astonished by the beauty of it
Hmm.
and how delightful it is. Delightful is a really great word to describe it. Um, because, Up has that famous sequence where you see his entire life with his wife, in that sequence that just leaves you absolutely an emotional wreck by the end of it. And so, anyway. Wall-E and Up are sort of these Pixar movies that I admire so much, but I just don't love. And so out of all the movies that we've talked about, if we were talking about love as opposed to like their technical artistry or their plot or all the different elements, I think that Iron Giant is probably the one that I love the
Yeah.
most. Love, like love deep in my heart, like it just lives in a place in my heart.
The weight of the sort of depressing elements or like real elements of like a dramatic relationship like can weigh on the story.
Yes.
Like when you compare it to something like when you compare something like Up and Wally, where like that element is sort of present throughout, or it's hinged on like a later moment. Uh I was thinking like, well, don't other Pixar movies, or isn't that kind of a trope of Pixar movies? But and then I was thinking about Nemo, and in Nemo, if you think about it, terrible. Like literally, like the mom is killed. Like that
Yeah.
first sequence is terrifying. It's like it's literally a horror movie, but it's the first sequence. It's like we see it and then we've moved on. Like so,
Right.
it's in the back of our heads because, and we've experienced that, and now we see these characters, but we're past that. So that's why I can never stop talking about like the structure of how much I love that about Nemo. But like as a result, it's not as weighty on the story. What's more
That's
weighty
right.
is like what's happening in the present and what's like what the characters are doing right now, this very moment.
Yes.
So that's why I think probably it can get a little distracting, and also like um it feels like it kind of rips our heart in two, when
Yes.
they kind of focus or they try to do too much with it, I think.
Yes, yes. That's a really excellent way to put it. So the point that I was going to make, and I think that this is just sort of where we're going to wrap up, also because it's getting close to my bedtime. But anyway,
Yeah, you gotta get to bed in like 2 minutes.
yeah, in 2 minutes, it's 8:30. But
Hmm.
anyway, what I was going to say is what's interesting also about this theme and the movies that we've talked about is that, I on purpose pick the ones that are animated examples of this becoming human theme. And I was thinking, why there are plenty of examples of live action films, and I was thinking in particular, I think, oh my God, there's so many. There actually is a Spielberg
Transformers,
movie.
somebody said.
Yeah, but
When I
there's,
was when I was talking about that we were gonna do this topic, somebody said
yeah,
Transformers. I was like, oh, I didn't even fucking think of
I didn't
that.
even think about it either. I mean, that's so funny because I don't even think about Transformers as robots. That's so
No.
funny that I
Yeah,
think
I
that.
know. Yeah, they're more like aliens, I feel like.
Yeah, they're more like aliens. There's a movie called After Yang, which I haven't seen. There's Ex Machina.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna mention that. Damn.
Yeah, so there's so many live action examples of robots being human. or robots like who fill a human place in our lives. There's actually a movie, a Spielberg movie called AI, about a little boy who's a robot companion. So there's so many examples of this, and I was thinking about why they don't live in my heart the same way. I mean, I've seen
Machina.
Ex
Yeah.
Machina.
I would just watch that for the first time.
Oh, yeah. I just saw Ex Machina. That's the only one I've seen. I haven't seen After Yang, but I want to see that. Um, and I will just say that my exposure to the live action versions of this theme, I find pretty terrifying.
Yeah, yeah.
There's like a horror element to it. And Ex Machina is by Alex Garland, who always has a horror element to his films. And if you ever want to see the trailer, he just did a movie about a year ago where a woman is like being terrorized by all these different men who's played by the same actor. And the trailer is the scariest fucking thing I've ever seen in my life. So I guess my point is that robots in live action sequences are more, they come across as more alien, more terrifying, and they make me, at least as the viewer, question what the relationship was. Like, can you trust that? Can you trust this
Yeah, yeah.
entity more as much? And for whatever reason, when it's contained in the animated environment, it I don't know why. I mean, they're still terrifying in a way. The Iron Giant is terrifying at first to Hogarth, but at the same time, it feels like there's more runway to actually see the robot evolve and see it evolve. You know what I mean? Like, because you're in some ways, animation both distances you more and then also lets you appreciate and take in everything else that's happening. And so, I find live action versions of robots to be too close to how I feel about live action movies that use AI as a plot when AI is just gonna freaking take over the world and kill everybody. And so I think it's been firmly planted in my head that if we ever reach an era where robots are in part of our home, they're helping us do all kinds of tasks like Roz was programmed to do. I don't know if I'm going to be a consumer of that, Eric. I'm always going to be like looking sideways and being like, I don't know. I think that at some point its programming could go really wrong. It could just totally kill me. So
Yes.
yeah.
There's also, I'll just mention there's a video game called Detroit Become Human. Have you ever heard of that?
Mm-mm.
There's a lot of it's like a choice game, so you can have a lot of different endings, but one of the
Yeah.
endings is like, they have a successful revolution where they like become a part of society, like as people basically. So,
Yeah.
but there's another one that's like where they're really violent and they like, kind of they just rebel in that way.
Yes.
Um,
Will Smith was in a film called I, Robot, I think, where the
yeah,
robots were starting to go rogue.
yeah. I think it's like, well, animation, you're just allowed to have more fun and you don't have to worry about the like real life implications. Whereas live action movies, it's like now you're putting it in like a real life setting. So you're just going to automatically think of it like, how would this work in real life? And that
Yes.
obviously raises questions, that raises fears and, cautionary things.
And
Like,
by the way, that theme about that unease that we feel when
yeah,
how would this work in real life?
yeah,
That was one of the themes that we talked about in relation to our aliens episode.
yeah,
Remember, like throughout all of the movies, she's sort of like there's always an android character, and Sigourney Weaver is like, I don't know if I trust you
yeah,
because of what
yeah,
happened in the first one.
yeah,
So that theme of that, how alien they truly are, how non-human they are, it actually goes against the idea that they could ever evolve and become human, like
yeah.
they could become like us. Whereas animation, for whatever reason, keeps that door open beautifully. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
it makes it seem possible that they can be like us. And I think that that's a really interesting commentary on those two differences, the live
Yeah.
action and animation.
If you take the setup of Ex Machina, which is widely seen as a movie that's like criticizes AI or like raises very interesting questions about AI, like
Ethical issues.
yes, ethical issues, that's what I was looking for. But
Yeah.
the setup of that story was that two tech bros in a mansion in the middle of nowhere, like who are both weirdos, lonely coder weirdos, decide to
Incels.
yeah, decide to mess with these female AI, and treat them a certain way, put them in a
Right.
cage, like that was the setup of the story. It could have easily been not set up that way. It could have been like a very intellectual woman, wants a friend, like, or a little girl who's a genius, like creates a robot, like the question of robots' existence in these movies and stuff. It's like, oh, they're so evil. They could be evil or they could be
Right.
whatever. It's the same. Well, if you think about, humans, like humans could be just as horrible or just as evil or whatever. So
Yes.
at a certain point, it's just about like the level of intelligence and
Yes.
the intentions behind, the creations and stuff, which live action movies definitely bring up way more.
Yes.
And
That's actually a really great point because that whole idea about the intentions of the creator and how evil or principled they are, is a really interesting commentary on things like social media, for example, which so many people were arguing that things like Facebook and things like Twitter were inherently evil. And their creators were basically saying, no, they're just platforms, that can be
yeah,
used for good and for bad. But at the same time, if you don't there's no matter you can't just say it's just a platform. It
yeah,
actually the creators have to express intent in order to show that this should be used for good or it shouldn't be used for evil. So that's what Ex Machina
yeah.
illustrates so beautifully, And actually, one of the best examples, by the way, about this whole theme about robots or androids evolving to be more human was actually in the next generation with the character of Data, because
Mm,
one of the most brilliant episodes of that series is when the Federation tries to commandeer Data. They want to study him because they want to create more and they want to look into the possibility of creating more androids like him. And so Picard actually has to go to argue in a tribunal, a court, and argue for what makes a person a person. And he's arguing that Data is evolving and that Data, the role that he plays and the relationships that he has formed makes him equivalent to a human being with the same rights and the same rights and responsibilities and privileges that a human would be accorded. And it's one of the most brilliant episodes of The Next Generation. So there
yeah,
are examples, but in that case, that character could evolve over a 7 season television series, But in movies, which are much more tightly compressed,
yeah.
obviously,
That's a great point.
when they're much more tightly compressed, you can really only introduce them in the live action sense as a plot point,
Yeah,
And it's more often than not, it's just fucking terrifying. So
yeah.
that's a
That,
that's a,
that's a really great point. And like the amount of time you have to really establish something or to develop something.
yes,
That's what a good sequel can do. Like I was thinking just now of Alien, because in the first movie you could just come away thinking androids are evil, but in the
right.
second movie you have Bishop,
Bishop,
so
that's right. Yes. Who's
like
with
it
one
just
of
makes you think, and they reintroduced that plot point.
this particular group of movies. Um, they all had many moments of what I would describe as movie magic, you know? And movie magic is when you forget that you're watching a movie and you're so caught up in the emotion of something and you're so caught up in the beauty of what you're seeing. And so the magic exists on multiple levels. It exists in the beauty of what's unfolding between in front of your eyes, but it also exists in sort of the beauty of seeing human emotions and choices and themes being played out so beautifully. And
Yeah.
so I guess, what I want to say about, this group of movies that we've discussed and this whole idea about robots becoming human is that I'm really, really grateful that these movies exist and that they were made. I'm grateful for Chris Sanders and what he's
Hmm.
doing,
Yeah.
and even though I felt kind of goofy as a 50 something woman in a theater full of little kids, at the
Yeah, but
same
nobody should.
at the same time, afterwards I felt like I had been through something. I felt like I watched something, and so I think that all of these movies are really, really magical in their own way. And these days, there's so many movies that suck that I'm just really glad when I have that experience when I'm utterly transported to something else. So that's
Yeah.
my sort of final thought. Any final thoughts to share on this?
Uh, Final thought I would have is just like there's two more Wild Robot books that are in this series, and this first one was only the first based on the first book. So I had a lot of thoughts from my coworkers that it should be a stand or it could be a standalone which is like just not it's not even an option anymore. Nothing's standalone ever, unless it doesn't make enough money. So, um, but like I think there's a great argument for sequels. I think like you have the books, which is kind of argument enough, but um, a great sequel could really easily not easily could really simply um fix a lot of the issues maybe that we're showing in the first one, and that's kind of shows growth of you know a character and a story. Um, like I could definitely see there was not enough about like why Fink was so depressed in this first movie. Like how did he grow up where he just thought that he was never going to be loved and he hated everybody. Um, and I wonder if I should maybe read the books. But like DreamWorks specifically is known for really good sequels. I of course love Kung Fu Panda 2, but also the second Puss in Boots was really really good.
Yeah,
Um, and they expanded the themes from the first one each time. So it has me thinking that, and it's especially if Chris Sanders is going to be back on the new one. I think there's
right.
high hopes for like a great continuation of this world because it's very positive. It's like one of the more positive things that have come out,
Yeah,
and like seriously, I really think The Wild Robot's a perfect movie for kids, for everybody, but mainly for kids. And I think they should keep going. And especially with the new sequel, those kids will be a little older who fell in love with the first one. So maybe we can get a little deeper and a little less sentimental, a little more silent, you know.
yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway, this was fun to talk about.
super fun.
And I actually think that you and I were, I love, one of the reasons why I love talking about this is because, um, I think that a lot of people would scoff at like talking about animated movies that featured
Dude,
robots,
I
like as
don't
kids.
understand those people.
I don't understand either because I actually think that there's so many layers to these movies. I think they're deep. Like I think they're really,
Yeah,
really deep. And as I said already, they're magical. But anyway,
yeah.
thanks to all of our listeners who are out there and for our first evening episode. And I just love you
First
lots,
evening.
Eric.
Yeah, I love
I'm
you too.
I'm glad we got to do this.
Yeah, great, great, great
Good
talk.
night.
Yeah, good night. Go to bed.